Welcome back to Weekends with Alex Witt. Secretary of State John Kerry is preparing to head to the Middle East. It is part of an overseas trip that will include Europe as the White House continues to weigh its options regarding the crisis engulfing Iraq. Let me bring in former Congressman and Navy Admiral Joe Sestak and Republican strategist Joe Watkins. Gentlemen, nice to have you both here. Admiral, I'll begin with you. What are the worst case scenarios that the White House is worried about with respect to Iraq?
I think the very worst case is that Baghdad actually falls to ISIS, this new Islamic radical group. Look, they can then have a bastion that extends all the way from Baghdad all the way into Syria. And they can then potentially, over the years, because they're pretty sophisticated, begin to reorient themselves to go to Western Europe and eventually come to the United States. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Baghdad forces themselves are enough to stop them. To be able to begin to roll them back does going to mean we have to provide some surgical assistance and intelligence to them. And I think the president took a very prudent and wise decision to do what he's undertaken.
Robert Young Pelton was on with me earlier, sir. Admiral, this again directed to you. He said that he believed that this force of what he says is maybe 2,000 to 3,000 that make up ISIS, depending on where you're getting your numbers from. He thinks that the U.S. can pretty handily wipe them out, which I thought was very confident. But again, with the precision airstrikes that you're talking about, do you agree with that? Do you think they could be eradicated?
I agree with his overall statement that this ISIS force, who actually number, the number I like, about 11,000, are so far extended from Syria to Baghdad that they are basically at the end of their rope. They might besiege Baghdad, but I don't think they're going to go beyond it. And right now they're facing up to the special forces of the Iraqi government. They're facing up to the real hardcore American-trained troops that Maliki kept around the capital. So I think they're pretty much at the end of the rope. The problem is going to be rolling them out because they're embedded within the cities, and having the intelligence that only our drones, that only our satellites can provide them to say, here's where you want to pinpoint your artillery, or here's where you want to pinpoint our drones. I think that's what you're going to need to roll them back. Okay.
Joe, this week some of the architects of the Iraq War from the George W. Bush administration have reemerged. That would include Dick Cheney in an op-ed blaming President Obama for the current crisis in Iraq. Senator Rand Paul will be on tomorrow's Meet the Press, and here's what he is saying.
What's going on now, I don't blame on President Obama. Has he really got the solution? Maybe there is no solution, but I do blame the Iraq War on the chaos that is in the Middle East. I also blame those who are for the Iraq War for emboldening Iran. These are the same people now who are petrified of what Iran may become.
Are you surprised at all, Joe, that Rand Paul is not jumping on the bandwagon there, and the GOP bandwagon, if you will, and blaming President Obama?
Not at all. I mean, Rand Paul is somebody who really doesn't think that the U.S. should intervene much in foreign conflicts, and this clearly is a sectarian conflict that's going on right now in Iraq and also spreading over into Syria. I agree with a lot of what the Admiral said. I hope that we can be as optimistic as he is. As we all know, just in the last couple of days, ISIS has taken over 3 cities on the eastern border of Syria, near Iraq, near the Iraq border, and their hope is to be able to take over a key military airport. Spread out, but nonetheless they are on the move, and part of the challenge, I mean, even the Globe and Mail newspaper criticized the president not so much for being cautious. They think that caution is a wise thing in these kinds of conflicts, but they criticize him for not having a plan, for not having a policy going forward that says this is precisely what we're going to do. The president has said he doesn't want to have mission creep, so he doesn't want this to become something bigger than it is, but nonetheless there is no clearly defined mission going forward as to how we deal with ISIS and how we deal with Iraq.
I'm curious, Admiral, your assessment or your opinion of the critics that are out there of the Obama administration right now. What do you want to say to them?
Well, I have felt at times that the president has been a bit slow to respond. For example, I felt, as I came on your show, I think a year and a half ago, and said that we should have been, with small arms, giving some type of armament to the more moderate rebels that are in Syria, so that ISIS, which eventually grew there, was able to gain a base there and then come back into Iraq. But on the whole, let's remember that we kind of did, as General Powell said, broke something in Iraq. And once you break it, you're dealing with a lot of splintered groups out there that are pretty hard to control. And so my take on this is that this is another of very many types of Islamic radical groups that are going to spring up over this world until this global war of terror is actually successful. And I think the nice thing about the military today that the president is about to use is that we have transformed a lot so that we're able to do it unlike that misadventure of when we went into Iraq that Rand Paul referred to with thousands and thousands of troops, but be able to kind of handle these situations with minimal cost to American soldiers' lives.
But, you know, Admiral, that conversation that you're recalling from 18 months ago when you talk about the possibility of arming sympathetic groups, small arms weapons at least.
Yes.
Isn't part of the problem, wasn't it then, and wouldn't it be still now, identifying the proper people to arm? I mean, knowing for certain who you are giving weapons to?
Yes, Alex, and that's a wonderful point. It's also why we're putting these 300 advisors on the ground in Baghdad to make sure that the targeting that's going to be done is against the right groups. But we gave radios very early on to the moderates and probably some of the less moderate forces over there. And when we give radios and communication gear out, we're not doing it as a gift. We make sure that we're able to listen into those radios to figure out who's who in the zoo, so to speak. Once we knew that, and we got a pretty good picture of it after that, we were able to identify who to give arms to. However, as you well know, Alex, even after we made that decision, the execution of getting those arms over there was inexcusably slow. That said, again, I step back that this president inherited a massive problem. And I think he made the right decision to withdraw from Iraq with forces around that can intervene quickly with the right unique capabilities like we are now if we have to protect our interest over there.
Okay. Gentlemen, we've got a lot to pack in what remains of the show, so my apologies to you, my dear friend Joe Watkins, for being a bit shortchanged with you, and we'll see you again, no doubt, as we will you, Admiral Joe Sestak. Thank you.
Great to be back with you.
Thank you.